Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a discussion on the challenges and opportunities related to managing enterprise-scale engineering teams post-pandemic. A pretty exciting and topical discussion for all of you. I'm Samir Chadha. I'm co-founder and managing director of Westbridge Capital Partners, and I'm joined today by a fantastic panel that includes Abbas Sharma, Director of Engineering at Uber, Aditya Modi, Senior Engineering Manager at LinkedIn, Kintan Brahmbat, GM of Podcasts at Amazon, and Eric Nuyant, Head of Engineering at GetAround. Thank you all for your participation today. And with that, let's get right into the conversation since we've got a fairly brief time here and a wonderful panel. One thing I'm curious, fellow panelists, is I'm curious to hear what kind of techniques you use to manage your software engineering developing teams during this pandemic, and what are some of the things you learned through that process?
I guess I can go first. Go ahead, Kintan.
Okay, if I can go first, I think it's been about the high order bit for us has been about the human element of it. So frequency of communication and transparency and inclusion. So even if it sounds repetitive, we've increased the frequency of both one-on-one meetings as well as broader team meetings or all hands of sorts or town halls of sorts, so that everyone is on the same page. That's one. And the second aspect is just the authenticity of communication, and more so on a personal level, since especially in a remote setup, it's hard to develop those social bonds. We've made those communication channels a bit more non-rehearsed, more real-time, allowing the broader teams to ask questions real-time as opposed to just submitting questions in advance, for instance. So those are the two topics that we found useful.
Thanks, Kintan.
So Kintan actually touched upon a really good point, which is communication, something that we also have been super mindful of. The one other thing that I could probably touch upon is meeting fatigue. So with Zoom, Zoom fatigue is real. And so one of the things that we've actually done is to be super mindful of how many meetings we're scheduling and can we consolidate some of them. Do we need everyone in the meetings, and so on and so forth. And the other thing that we have also done is instead of having back-to-back meetings, have a 5-minute break, for example, between meetings. So schedule 25 or 55, 45 minutes instead of the full half hour, 1 hour meetings.
I think extending on that, my biggest learning through all of this was flex hours and static hours, which is, during the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to actually meet my peers, wives over Zoom, partners over Zoom, children over Zoom, pets over Zoom, this whole side of their household or family that I never knew existed when we were in the office, and actually giving them the space to be able to work with that. So, homeschooling was a real thing. I don't have children yet, but I have a puppy that couldn't go to doggy daycare anymore, and I had to take him out for walks more often. So actually being cognizant of the fact that people actually need those blocks of time where they can be with their family, can be with their children, can be part of homeschooling or whatever it is, and then also having a static block that works for everyone, where we could do full team meetings where it'll be an hour that works for everyone to be there. And learning to work with that not everyone can be online at this exact same times anymore, and that's something that might not even go away after we recover from the pandemic.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that actually. In general, that's a major strength that we have working remotely, and I think it's really important to lean into the strengths of the medium that we have, because there are many. There's many downsides, as we all know, but on top of getting to know each other better in our homes, there's also, for example, we've made some great hires over this time. And part of that has been that people are less nervous in interviews. We've been able to break those sessions across many days and fit people's schedules much more easily. And we've been able to tailor our interviews. In fact, many of our modules have improved a lot, not being in front of a whiteboard and asking people to write code on the whiteboard. So there's a lot of benefits there. And I think in general, a lot of personality types are thriving in this environment. I'm a more extroverted person, so I have my bias towards the way I like to communicate. But there's a lot of people in my team who are really thriving when our decisions are being made in many media, right, across documents and asynchronous communication, and in meetings where we have to be a lot more deliberate about how much airtime each person is taking because of the limitations of that medium. So yeah, there's a lot of things here we've been able to build on, and it's still early in the journey. We're moving completely to remote first again.
Yeah, that's great, everyone. And Eric, thank you. That's a great segue to the next question. I'd like to focus on a point that Eric raised on hiring. And Abbas, I know you've chatted about this too before, but how have you guys hired during the pandemic? I presume most of you have not met most of the people you hired, if any, right? And how have you hired? How's that worked? What have been some of the challenges in hiring? Have you hired more or less? And how talk about hiring and how that sort of changed for you during the pandemic.
I guess I can take the first crack of this. So I used to work for a company called Postmates that was acquired by Uber very recently. We were very fortunate in the sense that during the pandemic, more and more people switched to delivery as a means to get groceries or to get food or to get anything that they could need. So our hiring needs really blew up during the pandemic. We needed to hire more aggressively. We needed to hire more people. And we always had a remote first engineering culture. We had remote engineers, but it was still we would still ask them to fly into the office and be in a room with a bunch of people and whiteboard, as Eric was just calling out. And those things just weren't doable anymore, which was, at first was scary, and we didn't know how to do it well, and we had to redo all of our interviews, but was also a great forcing function to build a better hiring pipeline. Now, as we recover, when we recover, we'll always have the option of, do you want to interview completely remotely? Do you want to come into an office to interview? We'll never be forcing the physical whiteboard. I, in fact, was always really horrible with online diagramming tools. It's something that I had to learn to do so that we could do the usual design questions that we would do on whiteboards now via online diagramming tools. Also giving, optionality for diagramming tools. I can use Google Draw, someone else can use something else. So all new things, all very reusable skills, and things that, in this hybrid world that we'll be returning to, hopefully, will still be very applicable going forward and help us build a faster and bigger recruiting pipeline.
Yeah, definitely. One other thought that triggered in my mind, Abbas, as you were talking about the hybrid model is, how software teams get managed going forward. And what I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on. Maybe I'll pick on you, Aditya, first. Your guys' thoughts on post-pandemic. What would you guys continue to do remotely versus what would you guys want to do physically, in terms of managing software developers, managing hiring, and so forth? How's a new model likely to look for you, Aditya? And then I'd love to open that up as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I say that because this is something that we are actively also trying to figure out as we start, having some folks work out of the office to see what is it that we like about the in-person interactions and what is it that we love about being remote. So this is an activity which is in progress, at least at LinkedIn, so to speak. The one thing that I would say is the fact that now there will be a hybrid model, super mindful that we have to be as leaders, is that some engineers who are not in the office do not get left out on some of the hallway conversations that otherwise happen, and how to ensure that with this hybrid model, how does everyone feel included, even if they're sort of in different locations and working differently, which is very easy to do when everyone's remote, but very hard to do when everyone's hybrid. So some of these factors are also being considered when we're thinking about how we are sort of rolling out the strategy.
And Kintan, curious to get your thoughts on that, how you see it for your organization, the post-pandemic hybrid versus remote model.
Yeah, I think the hybrid model is obviously going to stay, and there's a lot we have learned both from the last year or so around remote work. It's a lot we have learned about things to continue doing more of and things to not do. A highlight that has struck a chord with us is the importance of asynchronous communication and the importance of documentation, so that folks who may not be present at the same time in the meeting or so on can easily catch up. Also, the ability to quickly audit, so to make it easier for others to audit, and others meaning not just the managers, but also other dependent teams. If you're working in a broader environment, when other teams are dependent on each other, then making sure that they know how to audit the progress, they know how to audit where there are blockers, and a rigorous approach to documenting the right things. And that this doesn't need to be very large, full documents, but knowing that even every developer, every manager or PM, knowing that they need to be mindful and thoughtfully intentional about what they document, with an intent that it should be the body of work should be easily understandable by somebody who was not present in a meeting, to facilitate asynchronous communication. I think that was the high order bit of something we would want to do more of, even as we move from fully remote to a hybrid world.
Yeah. That's helpful. And how do you guys see, as you move from fully remote to a hybrid world, as you're saying, Kintan, how do you see differences in managing corporate culture? And Eric, maybe I can pick on you to open on this, but there was a lot of stress, obviously, on creating a corporate culture in a remote-only world, because some of those hallway coffee conversations just obviously don't happen. Now there's going to be a hybrid model coming forward. But on corporate culture, Eric, how do you see that building corporate culture changing now post-pandemic for your group?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. It has been a challenge, and actually, I'm by far working at the smallest organization out of everyone here. So even in a company of less than 500 people, it takes a huge amount of intention and care to actually make changes. So I would say change management of any sort, trying to embed new values or a new way of working of any sort, is already a huge challenge. So I actually have trouble imagining how a 20,000 person organization would have to make changes in this world. So yeah, there's been a lot of careful messaging and using many communication mediums to do this. Post-pandemic, I think the opportunity we haven't had yet to do is to get everyone together for annual offsites and summits. And that I think will be a very key tool that we are budgeting for and are looking forward to.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, and one thing that I get a lot of questions on, and I'm curious to get this panel's thoughts on, is there's a sense that one can debate how much remote teams will continue or not, but the strong sense by everyone is that remote teams are going to dramatically increase, just because we've all kind of gotten used to them. And that's kind of our new normal. So there'll be some hybrid models, but remote teams are here to stay and grow. And as you look at many firms that are now building new teams and expanding, what advice would you guys have for managing remote teams for newer firms? So for younger companies that are managing remote teams for the first time, it's not easy. Everyone was kind of forced to do this through the pandemic, but there's challenges, there's failures. Any advice you guys would have for some of those newer setup of remote teams would be really helpful for the audience. And maybe
start
Kintan, please.
Yeah, I'll start real quick. Just onboarding. The high order bit is onboarding. Just invest as much as you can on onboarding with right processes, right support structure, mentor structure, and also documentation for the previous comment. I think onboarding in remote needs to be a little more different, a little more intentional again than in a non-remote setup.
What kind of things? That's really helpful. What kind of onboarding things work well, or what kind of best practices in onboarding help in a remote team?
I think more specifics around who to go to for what. So the support structure. The second aspect about an easier way, and that's where documentation helps for somebody who's new to the code base, somebody who's new to the culture, somebody who's new to the way decisions are made. for them to easily access the rhythm of the business across all dimensions in a somewhat easier manner. I think that's some of the onboarding docs I've seen in many of the other companies. Initially, they relied a lot more on shadowing and a lot more on one-on-one in-person conversations. I think that now we are forced to kind of pre-think a lot of those things and really write them down and make it easily accessible across various dimensions, and more importantly, to know whom to go to for what questions, as opposed to always go to the manager. I think what we've found useful is newer employees have found it more effective, and they knew that they don't need to just go to their manager or their onboarding buddy for every question, but if they knew that they can reach out to this person in this other team or that other person, and it gave them a sense of more sense of ownership and accountability. And there was some hesitation on pinging the manager 10 times a day for every random question. So putting them in charge of reaching out to the right person directly, I think that was helpful in a couple of cases that we saw.
Something that I'd like to add to this is be super deliberate about team bonding. So when everyone's in one place, organically relationships build up. But with folks being remote, we just need to spend a little more time and be a lot more deliberate with regards to how can the team feel more like a team. Have regular happy hours, game hours, have some scheduled time where you're not talking about work and talking about everything else, which is not work, right? So being very deliberate about it is, in my opinion, also very critical.
I think just to extend on what Kintan was saying, though, we invested very heavily. This wasn't a pandemic thing. We were fortunate enough to build out remote teams even before the pandemic. And when we started doing that, we had to invest very heavily in self-onboarding resources, which is moving away from 10 a.m. Pacific. This tribe engineer who has the most tribal knowledge will give you a walkthrough of this code base that they have the most tribal knowledge on, and going away from that into you're onboarding someone in Russia and 10 a.m. Pacific doesn't work for them. So what are the resources that they can use themselves? Still, presenting live is a very important part. It's a very great way of making relations. It's a really great way of getting to know people who are there, but making sure that there's enough self-onboarding resources so that at 10 a.m. Pacific, you're not expecting your Russia team to show up and listen when they're feeding their kids at 11 p.m. their time, whatever it is. So yeah, just self-onboarding resources is a critical investment for us.
Yeah, we've been more scrappy, obviously, at our scale, and I would say giving advice to a team that's just dipping their toes in this water is to be really clear about what you're solving for and what success looks like exactly, so that you can be measuring and paying attention to that stuff from the beginning. So we've definitely had some failures pre-pandemic with having remote workers when most of the team was in the office. We've also had some failures trying to build a whole team elsewhere also, when we didn't fully fund all the dependencies they had on us. Either they might be an engineering team but didn't have enough product and design support there. And so there are ways in which those teams really weren't set up for success. So what we do now is we run pilot projects. So we find a particular task or 3 to 6 month project that can be done, and then we try a new framework and structure. So we are, just shout out to Turing. We're working with Turing now on such a project to figure out exactly how that can work and what things we can develop to figure out if we can do that more full time.
Yeah, that's great, Eric. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to also return to one thing also that I think Abbas, you'd raised in the beginning about personal matters like taking care of your dog or taking care of your parents or your kids, or if you have older parents, right? And that's also part of the reality of remote work, that we're all kind of working. And in some ways, there's no boundaries. You can work evening, weekends, nights, and at the same time, life gets in the middle. How do you guys manage that with teams? How do you give enough personal space to your teams to kind of function well, while balancing workload and timings? And how do you create a sustainable, remote work culture, managing personal life? I'd be curious to get any of your thoughts on that.
I guess one thing that I've sort of done is lead by example. So I have a toddler at home. he does listen into my meetings, so he's on my lap sometimes, and he's just wants me.
Grow up to be a really smart engineer, Aditya.
training from the very early days. So like just leading by example helps the team, understand that hey, it's okay to do some of those things, and just be comfortable with it.
I think ours was, or again, this came organically. This wasn't someone's idea at the start. It was having very deliberate meeting hours, that worked for all the various time zones. It was obviously uncomfortable for some people, I'm sure. I had to take meetings at 8 a.m. Pacific, and that's slightly earlier than I like meetings. But having those deliberate hours where we're expecting everyone to be there, and making sure that that's the only time when you really have to make sure that there's a shared hour for everyone. And other than that, giving people flex schedules, and giving them the ability to work at the hours that work for them and for whatever circumstances they might have at home.
Just a quick corollary to what Abbas said, also have dedicated no meeting days or no meeting times, where like we have once a month, everyone just goes off on a Friday, once a week, no meetings on a Wednesday, things like those. I think they've also helped, because sometimes, despite best of intentions, something or the other pops up, and having a dedicated no meeting day helps.
Yeah, having those carved out times for no meetings so people can do something personal, right? Yeah. Lots of research has shown that a diverse team, diversity of background, culture, can help creativity and productivity of a team. Do you guys see that trend continuing in your software development teams? More diversity of background, skills? Do you not, post-pandemic? How are you thinking about diversity of skills and backgrounds on your teams as hopefully COVID's calms down?
Yeah, that's been extremely important to us, and of course, I'm sure everyone here knows that this is a particular challenge along certain fronts of diversity for engineering in particular. And we had a whole system set up and a lot of attention put in pre-pandemic. And I think the jury's still out for us for whether or not we can find that same sort of diversity or how to do it while hiring remotely. It would seem that you'd open up the gates a lot more people who are living not in the main tech hubs. But then on the other hand, I'm not sure if those other hubs draw the same number of diverse candidates. So I'm just really curious what everyone's experience is around this. Though we do get a lot more nationality diversity, right? And so that's a huge benefit. Our current pilot project actually has folks from Russian Federation, Nigeria, Dominican Republic, Egypt. That's all really great. But the other kind of diversity, I'm curious if others have had some successes there.
Thank you. Yeah, please, whoever would like to jump in, I would love to hear any thoughts on diversity and managing and creating diversity on your teams.
I think diversity, as Eric pointed out in one of the earlier points as well, I think diversity of personalities has been very interesting. I think remote has been quite inclusive of various personality types. That's been great. Definitely, helped us even across the world. There are clusters of folks from a certain background, ethnicity, and so on in different cities. So hiring remotely versus hiring in a certain city has helped us bring on newer perspectives and newer folks from varied backgrounds, which has been quite useful. But more importantly, I think because people are in their own comfort zone of sorts while working, it has really helped bring out their unique perspective and diversity of thought, as it may be referred to in this context. And that has really helped, regardless of a person's job title, for instance. So we've had new kinds of ideas around the business or the content coming from the eng team, vice versa. Some interesting optimizations coming from the product team. that are applied to engineering. And I think remote has helped give a platform, an equal footing to folks across various various backgrounds to voice their inputs and opinions. So that has worked out more from a diversity perspective for us, in addition to the race, gender, and so on, background, ethnicity background, and so on.
And I'll just to take this full circle, I'll actually take it back to the hiring pipeline, which is being remote, interviewing remotely is also this like free bias remover. Like when you have someone sitting in the room with you, you're looking at what they're wearing, you're looking at what shoes they're wearing, and those things for a lot of people just add up as biases, which like don't apply now when you're doing all these interviews remotely, right? Like, full disclosure, I'm wearing pajamas right now, but you would never know that. And like that's the exact example that these things, like these biases, get removed as you move to remote hiring. Where people are from, where people are living, what kind of situation they're living in, what they're wearing, those biases that would usually apply when they're in person, again, like just completely disappear with remote hiring that we're doing now.
And I think Kintan probably alluded to this. Just since the hiring has now been remote, it just gives us an access to a bigger pool of talent, which naturally brings a lot of diversity, which has worked out pretty great for us so far.
Yeah, I just want to add one more point. This is as much about inclusion once people are at the company as well. And one thing that's actually become a very valuable social space for us are actually our affinity groups. So various places where people from all backgrounds and their allies can gather and have a discussion about things they care about. I participate in many of them, and I'm in the Asian American Pacific Islander one for myself. And those are just places where I've had conversations that actually weren't happening over in the office, and include people from all over our offices everywhere. So it's been kind of a silver lining for us.
That's great. No, that's really helpful, guys. And I'm going to ask one last question, because I know we only have a few minutes left here, which is talk about biggest lesson you've learned as managers. You've all managed remote teams very successfully. If you can just touch on biggest lessons for you in managing a remote team, as running a whole remote team. We've talked about certain specific aspects about it, like hiring and culture and diversity. But zooming out a bit, how's the rhythm of managing a remote team different for you guys versus versus a more on-prem team?
I could do a quick one. I think for me, the highest order bit was personal connections. Even when you have a very large team, taking every few months, even taking 15 minutes to do a one-on-one call, just learning about how folks are feeling, or after an all hands or town hall, just asking about if somebody had something going on in their life, asking about the non-work aspect. It goes a longer way. And those things happen anyways in person, because you'd asked about that in a hallway conversation, but being more deliberate about it in a remote setup has been helpful.
Keeping some of that human connection with your team, right? Mm-hmm.
And just building onto that, it is like the team bonding aspect that I talked about earlier. Like if you hire smart people, they definitely get work done. But to ensure they operate as a team, as one unit, and are happy doing it, the team bonding aspect plays a big part. And so again, being very deliberate about the fact that happens is super important.
Excellent. Well, I know that we kind of need to wrap up. We've hit our end of time here. So I just want to thank all the panelists for an amazing panel. I know I learned a lot, and thank you guys for taking the time. And we'll see the rest of you in the rest of these sessions on this amazing program that Turing's put together. So thank you, everyone, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.